Like a lot of film buffs and moviegoers of my generation, I get a bit nostalgic for the analog, handcrafted, or otherwise practical effects of yesteryear, and to a lesser extent today, and it's actually that lesser extent I'd sort of like to talk to you about. Specifically, I want to tell you about 4 films, all made within the same year, 2004, that utilize a process that came to be known as the Digital Backlot. So here it is, 4 films from around the globe that comprise the Digital Backlot Cycle.
Abel Edwards has a distinction unique amongst all the other films of this cycle, a Guinness World Record for being the first feature-length motion picture shot entirely in front of green screen, with no practical sets visible in the final product. There may be a table or some chairs, but they're often draped in green and replaced digitally by more decadent furnishings. The film is described as retro sci-fi, patterned off Orson Welles' Citizen Kane, only with Walt Disney replacing William Randolph Hearst as the basis for the film's titular lead role. Casshan, strangely translated as Casshan for no good reason, is based on a popular Japanese manga and anime character from Tatsunoko Productions. Despite the 1989 animated feature Casshan Robot Hunter being a regular staple of the Sci-Fi Channel's Saturday anime programming block, Casshan received no theatrical release in North America, and in fact only became available on Region 1 DVD in 2007. When compared to the other films of the cycle, most critics cite Casshan as easily the prettiest and by far the most visually compelling, which is truly an accomplishment considering its budget of only $6 million, not even 1/4 the respective budgets of the next 2 films in the cycle. Immortal, full title Immortel ad vitam, is a French-Italian-British co-production with a Slavic writer-director and based on his own comic book. The film depicts a dystopian metropolis beset by the Egyptian god Horus, who is on a deadline of 7 days to find a suitable human host for his offspring, allowing him to cheat death. The host in question is Jill, an enigmatic woman with alabaster skin, blue hair, and an equally enigmatic past. In terms of production, really the only thing that keeps Immortal from simply being categorized as a fully animated film is the presence of barely a half-dozen live actors against a cast of mutants, aliens, and in fact other humans, albeit more stylized and cartoonish in appearance. This juxtaposition of flesh and blood human actors with pixel and polygon people is an odd artistic choice that does more to beg the question, why have human actors at all than anything else? Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow began as a 6-minute demo reel for director Conran, demonstrating his love for the old Max Fleischer Superman shorts, as well as various pulp magazines and comic books of that era. So compelling, in fact, was this trailer, not only did he get a green light from producer John Avney to produce a full-length version, but also attracted some of Hollywood's finest, including Gwyneth Paltrow, who had agreed to the film without even reading the script.
Alright, let's crunch some numbers and get an idea of how well these films did. Now, I can't really memorize this part, so if I glance down at my script, that's all I'm doing. It's just for the sake of the statistics. Abel Edwards was shot for $30,000, never had a major theatrical release except 2 film festivals. Luckily, Steven Soderbergh was at one of them, and he was able to get the film a DVD release. Immortal, not a lot of information available on how well it did. Its budget is listed at 22 million euros, which is about 40-50 million US dollars. As far as return figures go, the only one listed anywhere is a weekend gross of just over 150,000 euros. Casshan, likewise, I couldn't find a lot of information on. In fact, I couldn't even find a weekend gross or anything. All I had was the budget. But given that that budget was only about 6 million, and given the popularity of the character in Japan alone, even if it only made half of what Sky Captain made $37 million against a budget of 40 million, that's still nearly 3 times its budget. So, apart from the box office, what about the critics? How did they like it, or how did these movies fare on that field? Mixed, generally. The biggest subject that comes up in any criticism of these films is the performances. People think that they're stilted and wooden, one-dimensional, like they're literally cardboard cutouts dangled in front of a mesmerizing background that they never really fit into.
The effect of green screen on actors is rather polarizing, with the most common complaint being that they have to imagine their settings and situation in addition to focusing on their performance. In effect, the scenery becomes notable by its absence to them, and ultimately a distraction to the actor. The counterpoint to the lack of scenery hindering the performance for the actor because it's more for them to take on board, part of the argument, is typically along the lines of citing how stage actors usually don't have full or complete sets even in bigger productions, yet can give good performances all the same. Okay, fair enough, but it overlooks a fundamental difference between film and a stage production. There is no post-production in theater. The audience has as much to work with visually as the actors. Both parties are working to suspend their disbelief, so it creates a level playing field. With movies, on the other hand, what you see is what you get. The movie is doing the imagining for us, so the audience is free to scrutinize the performances and judge how well the actors are reacting to what they don't see but you do.
It's like that game on Whose Line Is It Anyway, where it's the field correspondent reporting live from the scene, where they're standing in front of a pre-recorded video. They have no idea what the video is of, but they're asked questions by the people in the newsroom, and the irony of what they're saying versus what we're actually seeing is the punchline and forms the awkward, embarrassing moments. That's exactly what's happening here, only none of these films are comedies.
I'm not being fair. It's not as if the actors are completely ignorant to what they're doing on that soundstage. After all, you don't need a Danish castle to know that your father was murdered by your uncle and no one sees this scheme but you. The script can tell you that just fine and dandy. Likewise, in Sky Captain, the actors were all shown the 6-minute demo reel by Conran, giving them a pretty good picture of just what kind of imagery they'll be playing off of. Similarly, in Able Edwards, actors would be shown storyboards and even concept art of their scene before the cameras ever rolled.
So yeah, the actors have an idea of what they're doing, but it's still only an idea. Sometimes what can even happen, rather unfortunately, is what they're shown in the pre-visual materials won't actually match the final product. So when all's said and done, it's still the actor's imagination versus yours. So, 4 films. How do they break down?
Sky Captain is the most accessible, the most imaginative, and also the most fun. Casshan is visually spectacular and makes the most of its meager budget, almost to the point of making the bloated plot forgivable. Immortal is strange, but by far the most original, making the most creative use of CGI. Able Edwards is a cute little novelty, good for film buffs and tech heads, but only really as a footnote rather than a complete experience.
Okay, what about the lasting effect, though? Is the Digital Backlot Cycle over? Well, no, not really, but the films that are being made that way are coming out in fewer numbers and farther between.
2005 and beyond brought us films like Sin City from Robert Rodriguez and Frank Miller, and based on his own comic book. Mirror Mask from the Jim Henson Company and comic legend Neil Gaiman, the creator of Sandman for DC's Vertigo label, considered by film critics to make the most artistic use of CGI. 300, based on another of Frank Miller's comics and directed by Zack Snyder, who would go on to direct Watchmen. And more recently, Will Eisner's The Spirit, directed by Frank Miller, all use the digital backlot, and on the whole might be considered better films than what we saw in 2004, but not by much.
So at the end of the day, the computer is a really good filmmaking tool. It's a good way to break down all the technical, financial, legal obstacles that can get in the way of a film's production, but it's just a tool. It can't make the movie for you. There's no magic make the movie cool button. You have to do that on your own. So there's really not a whole lot to be learned from the Digital Backlot Cycle, apart from if you know what you're doing and you're really clever, you can make the most out of even the most minuscule budget. Past that, it's all left up to history.